We are now on module 6. And hello, everyone, by the way. We are talking about the descriptive and inferential statistics using Excel. Okay. So here we're going to continue what we have started in module 5. And this is actually like a recap of modules 1 to 4, especially that descriptive and inferential statistics part discussed, except for the fact that we are no longer going to do manual calculations. Instead, we're going to make use of Excel to, of course, do it the smart way. Okay, so we are going to learn how to work smart regarding statistical analysis. Okay, so without further ado, let's start. Module 6. First, let's define descriptive statistics, right? Um, as shown here, descriptive statistics basically summarize data using measures like mean, median, mode, and standard deviation. So it is used by engineers to help understand the data distribution and variability. And this forms the basis for inferential methods. Um, we, in other words, ideally, we cannot perform inferential without going through descriptive statistics. Because here, this is the part where we get to see what our distribution looks like. And we have uh, parameters like mean and standard deviation or variances, which are required actually in performing inferential statistics. Okay. So in statistics, remember that by the way, that data can be considered as group when it is organized into class intervals, while ungrouped if it is a list of individual values. So one of the things that we do in descriptive statistics is we create also a frequency distribution. Um, Basically, well, especially when we have categorical data, so um, we count the frequency for each value answered in our categorical fields. Okay, so for example, we have options like red, blue, yellow, and green. So we count how many respondents chose red, how many chose green, and so on. So that's why in descriptive statistics, we don't do just the calculating for the mean, median, mode, or standard deviation. We also perform things like the frequency distribution and other probability distribution graphs. Okay, so the most basic of all is the frequency distribution, which is a tabular or graphical representation of data that shows the frequency of each value of or class interval in a data set. Okay, so other than that, in descriptive statistics, we are also concerned with the visualization of our data. And of course, it will be best if we have a frequency table, which we use to come up with certain visualizations like bar graphs, histograms, and circle graphs, especially if the data that we are handling is a categorical type. Okay, so we have this common data visualization techniques. We have the bar graph, best used when comparing categorical data or discrete values across different categories or groups. Okay, so with that, we need a frequency distribution table for that when we are talking about categorical data. Okay. Next, we have the histogram, which is best used when visualizing the distribution and frequency of continuous data. And then the frequency table, of course, to summarize and organize raw data to easily identify the frequency of values of categories, like how many chose red, how many chose green, and so on. Okay. We also have the line graph, best used when visualizing trends, patterns, or relationship in data that is collected over a period of time. So, for example, you want to measure the temperature in an environment from sun. Okay, let's start from 12:01 a.m. up to 11:59 p.m. So entire day for the entire day. You want to see the pattern of how how temperature changes from the start of the day up to the end of the day. Okay, so line graphs, historical data, anything with time series data, it's best to show them using line graphs. Okay. We have also options like stem and leaf plot, line plot, and the box and whisker plot, which we will show in a while, I think, or in our demo, right? So we have some more um, distinctions between group and ungroup data. And I think let's focus on the example. Okay, sample of use of group data is when we have exam scores grouped into ranges. For example, you don't just if we um if we list down all the possible scores, might be too long. Especially if we have a range of 100, like the the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 100. So if that's the case, then it's not a good idea um to present them as is. Okay, to minimize the presentations, we usually group our data by using some range. So, for example, we count everything that's from 0 to 9. Okay, that's one bracket. Okay, and then we have 10 to 19 as the second one, 21 to uh 10 to 19, 20 to 29 for the third one, and so on. Okay, so that's an example of group data. And for ungroup, of course, if it is not that easy um, to group our data, like to put them in brackets. Like for example, if we are measuring student heights and we want to see the individual height of each student. And like the scores, we can be concerned only in on which one has these very low scores, which ones have 20, 10 and above, 10 to 19, which ones are 90 and up to 99 or 100. So that's another way. Okay, that's another option for us. Um, what else? Okay. As for the height, we cannot just group. Although yes, it's possible that you're just concerned with how many are below this height, how many are within the middle, how many are above. Okay, that could be a possible use of group data. But if your point is to see exactly who has this specific height, or you want to see the specific heights in the entire data set, then we leave it as it is. Okay, we no need to group the data. Okay, so now for graphical representation, we have commonly used visualizations for ungrouped are the line graph, the bar graph, pictograph, and the pie chart. Okay, while for the group, we have a lot of if we have a lot to plot, we can minimize our plot by using a histogram instead of group data. Other options are frequency polygon, frequency curve, and the cumulative frequency curve. Although the most commonly used one is the histogram. Okay, so a histogram looks like a bar graph except that it has a certain range. Like This one is for 10 to 24. This one is from 25 to 39, and so on. Okay. So I guess that would be all for grouped and ungrouped. Now let's talk about the frequency distribution table. All right. So as you can see, we have, for example, we have these students from each section. Okay. And we want to count, we are grouping the students in terms of the frequencies. Okay. For example, we want to count, all right, 0 to 12. Okay. We want to count how many sections here. Okay, let's zoom in. Here in this specific case, we are trying to count how many of these sections from A to M, okay, have a range of 0 to 12 students. Okay, so we cannot, as you can see, the highest could be 27, I think. So instead of plotting from 0 to 27, we plot in terms of range. Okay, like starting from 0 to 12, how many? Using a formula like this one, frequency, this one. Okay, using this Excel formula, we can automatically count how many of these sections have a range of 0 to 12. Okay, in the same way, how many of them have a range of 13 to 6, 17 to 20, 21 to 24, and 25 to 29. So as you can see, when we use a formula, we basically use just type equal and then the keyword for our function to be used. Okay. So inside the function, we are inputting um, the parameters or the arguments. Okay. So that's basically how to create a frequency distribution. We provide out of the raw ungrouped data, we come up with our range. Okay, and then in each range we just determine the upper limit. Like from 0 to 12, the upper limit is 12. Okay, and from that, using the formula, okay. But actually, I have another way to do this, and I might include this in our demo. Okay. So the steps, first we list the data values, which are ungrouped, to create class intervals. Okay, so these are our class intervals. One class interval, second, another class interval, and then so on. Okay. After that, we count the frequency using this formula, the one being shown here. Okay. Tabulate the results, optionally including cumulative frequencies and relative frequencies. I guess we're going to talk about that in a while. Um, Also, it's nice to important what data you are handling. Remember, we have quantitative and qualitative. Um, our data can also be classified as either primary or secondary, discrete or continuous. Okay. Of course, categorical or numerical. Mostly quantitative are numerical and qualitative are categorical in most cases. Okay. So frequency distribution table, like this and this. For ungroup, we can have direct. Okay. We just count directly. But for group, we assign intervals. Okay, and then count. Right? So options for um visualizing uh the graphical distribution of a frequency distribution table, we have the bar graph, okay, or the column graph to be more exact, the histogram, and the frequency polygon. I guess the most common one is the histogram. Okay. Oh yeah, I'm so sorry for that. Okay, let me fix my slide for a while. All right. So Next step, we have here, we mentioned the absolute and the relative and cumulative frequency, right? So we have some types of frequencies like the absolute, which is the raw count of observation in a data set or class. So as is, that's our absolute. So for example, if we have this class interval and then we counted how many records or data points fall within this class interval, we just count. Okay. And then we may perform the um, relative frequency, which shows the proportion of each frequency relative to the total frequency or our sample size. So the total frequency 30 here is actually our sample size as well. Okay, so if it's 30, then everything will be divided by 30. Like this one, 3 over 30, that's 10%. Okay, 0.1 or 10%. 5 over 30, that's 0.167 or 6.7%, and so on. Okay, and the sum of our relative frequency should always be 100% or 1. Okay, 1.0 or 100%. That's the relative frequencies relative to the maximum frequency. So this is important this is what we do also in our we can do this as part of our data pre-processing stage. Okay. Another thing, we have the cumulative frequency. Um, we just for the first row, we just copy the whatever on the left side or whatever is our absolute frequency. Just copy for the first class interval. Now for the second class interval, whatever the second frequency or whatever the frequency for the second one, we add it with the previous one. So 5 plus 3, that would be 8. Okay. In the same way, for the third one, we add the second one to it. Or this one. Okay. We add 5, 8, and then the 8 here, the previous one. So we add the new absolute frequency to the previous cumulative frequency. So 8 and 8, we have 16. And then for the next one, we have the new absolute frequency 9 and the previous cumulative frequency 16. So 9 plus 16, that's 25. And lastly, we add the last absolute frequency 5 plus the previous one, 25. So all in all, 30. Now, regarding cumulative frequency, the total frequency or our sample size should be the one that will reflect as our last cumulative frequency. Okay? And then if you take the cumulative relative frequency, if you divide this by 30, then that's the same should come out here. Okay? So 3 over 30 is 1. 8 over 30 is 1. 16 over 30 is 1. 25 over 30 is 1. And the last number should be always 100%. Okay? So that's the cumulative relative frequency. It depends on the case, but normally we use this in the data pre-processing stage, right after we have cleaned our data. Okay? Now, note that descriptive statistics for ungrouped data focuses on raw data points and use straightforward formula, while group data involves summarizing data into class intervals, requiring adjusted formulas for central tendencies and dispersion, accounting for class midpoints and frequencies. So this discussion is quite long, and just observe the formula. The point here is ungrouped data is straightforward. Okay, we don't have a new formula for them. Whatever we discussed in the previous modules, that's it. That will be our formula as well for ungrouped data. But for the group, we introduce new ways to compute the mean, the median, or not really. The mean is just the same, but in terms of the median and the mode, we have further elaboration of the process. Okay? Or in short, the process is more complex when it comes to group data. Although the visualization, the presentation is simpler, what makes it quite difficult is the computation. But of course, in Excel, we normally everything is being considered as ungroup. So Excel treats everything that we write as ungroup data. Okay, so this is something we didn't discuss in module 1 or even in module 2. So we have the percentile, decile, and quartile. I'm going to focus on the quartile. So percentile, basically we are dividing our entire data set by 100 parts. Okay, where each part is a percentile, and we use that formula. Okay. Decile, on the other hand, we group instead of 100, we divide the entire data set as just 10. Okay. So each one is a decile, right? So my focus, or the one I um suggest here, is the quartile. So because this is the one that we use for determining outliers. Okay. Quartile, we divide the entire data set into four equal parts. We have the Q1, Q2, and Q3 as our division. Okay. So remember, if we have four equal parts, then that means we have three lines in between. So those three lines in between are our quartiles. The Q1 is the first line, and Q3 is the second line, and the middle line is our median. Okay, so Q1, Q2, and Q3. And I think we have the term for that here, interquartile range, or IQR, as the range from Q1 to Q3. So this is the part that we consider as the interquartile range. Okay, so to derive that, just minus whatever the value for Q1, just minus that from our Q3. Okay, so for example, if the value for Q1 is 1 and value for Q3 is 3, then our IQR is just 3 minus 1, that's 2. As you can see, 1, 2. Okay, so that's important when it comes to determining outliers. And you're going to see that later or even in the demo. Right. So these are essential measures in descriptive statistics for dividing data sets into equal parts, providing insights into the distribution, the spread, and the relative standing of data points within a set. Okay, so for example, you want to check how many are belonging to this part, this decile. Okay, to this decile, and so on. Okay, so that's for percentiles, deciles, and quartiles. Right. Now, this is something that we skipped during the module 1 discussion. Okay, because these are better discussed using visualizations. So now, discrete probability distributions, we are showing how data is spread, okay, or distributed, right? So the most common or the simplest type of discrete probability distribution is the Bernoulli one, because we only have two possible values, right? Like the pass or the fail. So we measure how many is the chance to pass and how many is the chance to fail, or what is the probability value of passing or getting a pass score, or what's the probability value of getting a failing score. Okay, so we compare that, and actually it will always be one. The sum of this probability value plus this probability value is should always be one. Okay, so we only have two things that we plot in our um probability Bernoulli probability distribution. Okay, so it's like flipping a coin. Okay, we just we get either a pass or a fail, or a head or a tail. Okay, and if we use an area chart, um, showing our Bernoulli probability distribution, we can see something like this. Okay, um, the the line or the division between the two values is a straight line. Okay, straight line. Unlike when we talk about binomial, it becomes something like a zigzag or a varying staircase like um, distribution. Okay, and binomial probability distribution is something like tossing a coin several times. Okay, so for example, if you toss a coin 5 times, you might ask how many times, or what's the probability that we only get one. Um, let's say this is 5 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so 5 trials. So what's the chance that we get only one head um, when tossing 5 coins? Okay, so we measure that, we compute that. Then how about 2 heads? And the rest are tails. Okay, so we measure that 3 heads out of 5, 4 heads out of 5, and so on. Okay, so this one is more than 5, I think. 2, 4, 6. Okay, it's a lot. Right. So meaning this has been done several times. And I think 4 times. Okay. Um, okay. So for example, let's represent um heads as 0 and tails as 1. Okay, so here, what's the probability that we get all tails? Okay, meaning we don't get any heads. Okay, so this is the probability. How about we only get head at the last toss of the coin? Okay, so this is the chance. How about second to the last? Okay, we have one head out of 4 tosses. We have one head. We get one head, but it's on the third toss. Okay. How about if it's one head but on the second toss? Okay. And how about if the first two we will get a, uh, a tail, and then the last two will get a head? Or what if it's alternating? Um, tail, head. Or we start with tail and then 2 heads and a tail. Okay, and so on. So we get until we get the last one, 4 heads. So what if, I mean 4 tails. What if we get heads, the ones are heads in my example. What if we get 4 heads? So what's the chance? Right. So we measure that, then we graph them, and we see the corresponding binomial probability distribution. Okay, so as you can see, we only in each trial, okay, we have 4 trials each, and in each trial we only get either a 0 or a 1. Okay, and in Excel, don't worry, there's a formula for that. We no longer like, how do we derive these values? If we do it manually, it's quite long. Okay, and the formula is quite difficult to memorize. But using Excel, you can simply use a certain formula, and that's it. Okay, so we have the Bernoulli and binomial as common discrete probability distributions. Next to that is the Poisson. Okay, Poisson probability distribution. Like in this case, we no longer have two possible options only, but we have different options, and normally this is something about counting. Okay, when the data that is involved is about counting, like how many times we fail or we pass, then that's a Poisson distribution. Okay, but if um we are just talking whether we fail or pass, Okay, so the frequency is different from the actual fail or pass. If we're just talking about fail or pass, we have two possible options. But if we are asking how many times did we fail, okay, so there could be a lot more than two. Okay, in this case, we are measuring how many times, what is the chance that we get no failures at all. Okay, when, for example, when we are um, testing our machine learning model. Okay, so what's the chance that we don't get any failure? Meaning, out of 15 times that we tested our machine learning model, none of them failed. Okay, so the chance in this case is 0.0002. Okay, based on the formula. Okay. And how about 1 out of 15? We got this chance. 2 out of 15, up to 15 out of 15. So what's the chance that we all get it wrong? Or the AI model or the machine learning model will get everything wrong out of 15. So using the formula, it's actually 0.0158. So there's a chance, actually, 1.58 chance, percent chance that it will fail. Okay. So normally, this is what we want to happen. Our distribution will be somewhat like this. Okay. Somewhat close to normal because we can actually convert this into a normal form. We have the term normalize. We can normalize this by dividing by the total or the sum of the probabilities. Okay, so these probabilities, we add them together. In this case, it's just 0.98. Okay, probably due to some round offs or in the approximation in the formula that we use or that Excel uses. Okay, so in this case, the highest is 98%. So we normalize each of these by dividing them by 98. um I forgot the formula. Something like that. I think times 100 divided by 98, something like that. Or we just directly multiplying 0.98, I think, or dividing 0.98. Right? So we divide each one by 0.98. That's why it increased a bit. Okay. So all in all, if we take a sum, it will always be 1.0. So the sum of all of our normalized probability values will always be 1 or 1.0 or 100%. So the sum of all these, if you measure them all together, it will always be 1.0. Okay? So in this case, the highest is 0.14. But if you add them together, that should be 1.0. If this is the normalized one. Okay? I believe the one I plotted here is the normalized version. Okay, so if this something like this comes out, then our parametrical statistical methods can be applicable. Okay, it has a bell-shaped curve and it's somewhat symmetrical. Okay, the left and the right are symmetrical to each other. Okay. Now, on the continuous side, as you can see, this is still part of discrete probability distribution because our the ones that we the data that we handle here are discrete in form. Okay, discrete, such as the counting numbers or the frequencies. They are discrete, nothing in between 0 and 1. Okay? So it's not either 0 or 1. It's always 0 or 1. Okay? It's not something between 0 and 1. Okay? Like here, we don't have values in between. Okay? So just like when we count 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Okay? But if we have continuous values, although this one are rounded off, but most of the real world signals are when we present them as data, they are continuous numbers actually. Okay, continuous numerical data. So uh, to do that, first we have to find the relative frequency, and then we come up with our corresponding probability using the normal distribution function. So for example, out of all these resistance values, the total resistance that we have is 136. So we just divide by 136. We have the relative frequencies. So um, although in this case, relative frequency is supposedly not here. Anyway, the more important one is the probability. So using the formula, um, we get the corresponding share or portion. For if this is the entire distribution, how much belongs to the resistance of 1 kilo ohm? Okay, what's the chance that we get resistance value of 1 kilo ohm? So assuming we have an assortment of resistors, um, what's the chance that we get 1 kilo ohm? Okay, whenever we pick one, what's the chance? Okay, so we plot all those chances or all those probability values, and from the first one up to the last one. Okay, so when we before we plot them, we sort our data set from lowest to highest. Okay, and once we have the corresponding probabilities, we don't touch them anymore because this arrangement, when we plot this, will become something like this. Okay, so as you can see, it's zero point 0.9, maybe due to some rounding off. And again, as part of our data preprocessing, it would be best to normalize this. So we divide everything by zero point 0.9. Divide this by zero point 0.9, we have these normalized values. And if we take the sum of all the normalized values, we get exactly 1.0. Okay. And we can now plot this as something like this. It's like a bell shape. Or if we use a line graph to plot this, then it will be something like this. Okay. So this is the one that was used for creating the plot, right? In addition to this one is our main concern actually, the normal one. And we have exponential, but we don't, that's too advanced already. Normal distributions are key in statistics for modeling data and making inferences. Skewness, kurtosis, and roughness affecting the accuracy of estimates and assumptions by indicating departures from normality such as asymmetry, tail heaviness, or irregular variability. So it's in short, what we want is our data to be normal. We have to check we perform descriptive stat, and one of the things that we can derive for our descriptive stat results is some clues. We can have some clues that can help us determine whether the distribution is normal. And one of those indications is the relationship between the mean, median, and mode. Okay. Mean, median, and mode. If they are close to each other, then we can assume that data set is normal. So ideally, they should be equal. Okay. But as mentioned in our module one, we have the central limit theorem. If you have a very low sample size, then you cannot expect your data set to be normal. That means if you insist your statistical testing on a non-normal data set, then that the result could not be credible enough. Okay. So an indication when it comes to visualization, an indication that the data set is normal is of course when it is bell-shaped type, okay? Whether it is a one-tailed or a two-tailed test. Um, Also, when it comes to skewness and kurtosis, skewness, it does not skew to the left or to the right. Okay, positive skew if to the left, negative skew if to the right. Kurtosis, the kurtosis is just enough, or just zero, ideally. Although non-zero but low kurtosis or close to zero kurtosis is allowed, can still be considered as normal. Okay, but the most important of all is having more sample size, because according to the central limit theorem, the more um, the more your or the higher your data set size or sample size is, the more normal it becomes. So for example, this one has 25 sample points only, or data points. If we increase it by 50, so from 25 we now have 50. As you can see, it becomes more normal. Okay? This one is more normal than the first one. But if we double it further, we now have 100 data points, then this one becomes more normal. Okay? So that's the main one of the main applications of descriptive stat. We check not just taking the mean, median, mode, and standard deviation and variance, but also checking whether a data set is normal or not. Okay, so let's continue this for in the next part.